Let's head to one of our other top stories, though. Of course, the announcement made by Donald Trump. This is to do with the US troops pulling out of northern Syria and what Turkey is likely to do. Now, this does involve Australia and what we might do. The indication so far is not much about those women and children in those refugee camps. Joining me now is Bob Bowker, a former Australian ambassador to Jordan, Egypt and Syria, now, of course, at the Centre for Arab and Islamic Studies at ANU. Thanks very much for your time today, Bob Bowker.
My pleasure.
Let's start with what Turkey is exactly preparing to do here. So it's a military option or operation it's talking about in northeast Syria. It says it's about creating this safe zone to resettle Syrian refugees. Is that a fair summation of what's going on here?
Well, in fact, what the Turks are proposing to do is to use Turkish allied militia to invade the northern area of Syria in order to prevent the establishment there of a Kurdish state or statelet, which the Turkish government would regard as a potential long-term threat of Kurdish irredentism through its potential to support the PKK, which has long been fighting against Ankara. The suggestion of population movement into the area is, of course, a breach of international law. You cannot change the population structure of any place that you happen to occupy. It's a breach of the Geneva Conventions.
As troublesome as it might be for your country, you can't just press gang people because that's what you prefer to do.
Well, Turkey has about 2.5 million Syrian refugees at the moment, and obviously is worried about what their long-term future will hold. But clearly the Turkish intention is to settle Syrians into areas from which they did not originally come.
Well, it's saying that, isn't it? I mean, this is
yes,
not, you don't have to read the tea leaves here.
No, that's right. And they basically are trying to destroy any chance the Kurds have of maintaining a population majority in those territories.
So what about the concerns Turkey talks about? It mentions the PKK, that's a listed terror group in Australia. Most of the forces who helped defeat ISIS in this area are actually from the YPG. Can you merge this threat as Turkey is seeking to do? Can you understand from their perspective why they see the groups as a whole as a threat?
The Turks have a legitimate concern about the PKK. It has acted, has taken terrorist action against the Turkish government for many years now. The YPG is very closely affiliated with the PKK. But the question is really whether you can contain the behaviour of a Kurdish independent area in that part of Syria to avoid it providing strategic depth to the PKK and to ensure that there is a balance in the relationship between Syria, Turkey and the Kurds, which is a durable one. Now, pulling the American forces out and basically giving a green light to Turkey to invade through using its proxy forces is not going to produce a durable solution to that problem.
So what was the hope here? With the troops staying in place, there was certainly a stalemate at least, and Turkey wasn't going to launch an operation at that time. What was the hope about how this could have played out in a sliding doors moment if there was a more resolution from the US to stay involved?
The Americans were trying to provide an assurance to the Turks that they would have joint patrols with Turkish forces through these Kurdish areas, and the Turks could be reassured that there would be no armaments, no militia activity and so on, which would be prejudicial to Turkey. The Turks never agreed to the depth that the Americans were proposing, but the Americans went ahead and persuaded the Kurds to withdraw their heavy weapons and a lot of their artillery positions and so on.
Right.
And basically what you've had now is the Kurdish military capability being significantly degraded, immediately followed by the Americans giving the green light to the Turks.
Right, and Russia possibly joining. I mean, meaning they don't stand much of a chance.
The Russians are going to take steps together with the Syrian government to recapture the oil fields which are currently under the control of the Kurds. And the Damascus and the Russians will then proceed to negotiate with the Kurds, who will be in an extremely weak position militarily and economically. And at the end of the day, it's a situation which is looking very bad indeed for the Kurds.
The Australians in the area, particularly those being at the moment in these refugee camps, so basically women and children described as ISIS brides, some of these people, would it be feasible to extract them without loss of life now, do you think?
I don't think that there would be capacity to identify and remove those Australians in the amount of time that we have available, but I'm always willing to be surprised.
Could it have been done earlier? Because we saw journalists get in touch with some of them, for example.
It's very hard from this distance to know.
Right.
I do know that there is speculation that the French and the British will move SAS into those camp areas in order to try to contain the ISIS, but the real risk is a breakout. IS has already about 11,000 hardened fighters in those camps. They're waiting to get out.
Right.
And when they do, there is a very high risk of a vendetta against those Australians who have turned to the media and to the Australian government.
Who have spoken out, said, I was hoodwinked, I don't believe in this caliphate.
Right. They will be on lists.
And anyone that's there right now. So when you say breakout, we're talking about at the moment all these people, tens of thousands or more, being at the moment living in these camps, just what, absolutely degenerating into violence almost overnight?
Absolutely. The leader of IS, Baghdadi, called about a month ago for IS to begin a process of breaking their forces out of these internment camps, just as they did in Iraq. And that provided an enormous boost to Iraq. What we have to remember about Syria is that it is more a battle about will than it is about territory. And the whittling back of the Kurds through this American decision is going to give an enormous morale boost to Islamic State, and it'll be a severe blow to the Kurds. And the IS have not lost the will to fight, nor have they lost their leadership or their organisational structure. They remain a potent force, perfectly capable of conducting breakouts from those camps.
I guess we might be seeing headlines again about IS territory. A scary prospect. Bob Bowker, though, thanks for your thoughts today.
My pleasure.